G'day friends and fans, welcome to Dave Talks of Ukraine War update for the 22nd of November 2025. I'm your host, the author David Applegate, author of the books The Boyhood of Cade, Power Games, Into the Owl's Mound, and the Erotic Tales from the Empire, Part 1 out now, Part 2 coming soon. Thank you to all those who support the channel. You can support the channel through the links in my link tree. Now, before we get to Trump's 28-point plan, which we don't know all the details, but we do know some, and it's enough for now. I mean, it's up to Ukraine what they're going to do with it. And they have indicated how they may respond, which is good and bad news, depending on which side you think you're on. I really think when it comes to foreign wars, getting involved is dangerous. Now, I've often said those who glaze for Ukraine should move there. They won't. Now, of course, the situation is admitted now. They admit that the situation is dire in Ukraine. That's because the Russians have, in a couple of places, broken through the Ukrainian lines. But they haven't gone far. Now, they haven't broken through up here, and the fighting continues in the buffer zone in the north. And they did make a small gain here in the northern buffer zone and attacking positions up here. In Kupiansk, the Russians haven't advanced and continue to fight their way into Yulian and Petro. I know I'm not pronouncing them right. There's renewed fighting here on the northern part of the Eastern Front. What they call the Lyman area. As you can see, Russia's made a few small gains. Not much. There's still some areas where they haven't made any. But they are now much closer to Lyman. As you can see, they've shrunk the distance. Particularly with this growth spurt here. Although parts of this little section is holding out. They are in Seversk, in the south of Seversk. And Sedvinka, they've advanced here a little bit. Now, nothing, still fighting in the outskirts of Chavashard, nothing of consequence. Nothing of consequence here, although there's renewed fighting. The Russians have renewed fighting here, making small gains. They are fighting here as well, lots of fighting. Now, apparently there's 5,000 Ukrainians trapped in Pokrovsk. Now there's fighting in other areas as well. And there's possibly another 10 to 15,000 Ukrainians in Myriad. As you can see, the Russians are also cutting off here, Shrine. They've only got a small corridor open as the Russians have taken territory here. In the last couple of days, they have advanced in other areas as well. Here's where the main breakthrough has come, and they've now advanced a bit further towards Hulinopol and attacking Turn and other areas. This is, as you can see, they've putting a lot of pressure on the Ukrainians. And I think even the strongest of steel breaks. There is no pressure. Right? There's no armor that can stop every bullet. Now, there is renewed drone strikes here in the south. Ukraine has hit positions here, according to Ukrainian military intelligence. Nothing of consequence in the rest of Russia. There was an error alert. The drones were hit a enterprise in Krasnodar Krai, and a explosion was reported in Marivinka. Overnight, Russia only launched one ballistic missile towards Ukraine and 104 drones of various types. And I would put together that the missile was probably this one down here, and it's possible that this is yesterday's missile. Although they also talked about a grenade being set off in military enlistment office in Odessa that indicates that unrest in Ukraine is growing, which is also putting pressure on Ukraine. Now, of course, a lot of people would instantly just blame Russia for that, but there's a lot of people who didn't support the war and don't want to go to war, who don't want to be forced to go to war. Now, according to the Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov, approximately 5,000 Ukrainian troops are trapped by the Russian forces on the eastern bank of Oskil River. There's in Kharkiv no immediate response from Ukraine. Russia has captured a wave of settlements as they advanced. This has been a busy week for them. And according to the Russian Ministry of Defense, 33 Ukrainian drones were intercepted and destroyed. Ukraine says it's now holding the northern part of Posk and attempting blocking troops. This is an old statement. Those were overrun. Not overrun, sorry. They were pushed back. We go back to Posk. This is a pro-Ukrainian map, pro-Ukrainian sources. As you can see, they were holding the line along this section, and they were pushed back. They have been pushed back to the river. Okay? They are now trapped. They have nowhere to go immediately because they are pretty much on both sides Russian forces and the river. There's no immediate. Probably they are probably going to make their escape through the forest and regroup. Either probably if they regroup in Mira, they're just sealing their fate. This is, of course, this ad hoc battle line has favoured the Russians. It forces the Ukrainians to spread their forces thinner and allows the Russians to pick them off with drones as opposed to using the drones on long-range strikes where they're at risk of air defences. Now, of course, the drones they use on air defences are handled by the Ukrainian Air Force, but these smaller drones, the Ukrainians appear to have no frontline defences. They do have some guns, but they have to be at the right place at the right time. They've mounted them on the back of jeeps, in Taliban style. They do go around the front line trying to shoot down drones. But you think about your town and trying to find one drone in your town, okay? And then realise that you've got a machine gun with a couple of 100 rounds, but your range is only a couple of blocks. You're not gonna hit much. You've got to race around town. You've got less than only got a couple of minutes to find and shoot down the drone. Visually, they don't appear to have any sophisticated, localized anti-drone defense. And they haven't got staked out radar situated like Russia has. And Russia has, pretty much dominated parts of the battlefield. Not only parts. Other parts, they are stuck. And Ukraine has held well. And had Ukraine held well in a complete line, and not, instead of breaking it up into regions and trying to defend only the towns, Russia, they allowed pretty much the Russians to flank them in some areas. But yes, Russia has claimed Pokrovsk and other towns. But as for the peace plan, Ukrainian president has until this coming Thursday to approve the peace plan according to President Trump. This was after an hour-long phone call with J.D. Vance. An official announcement says that they will work with Washington and Europe towards the peace plan. Spoke with Zelensky, also spoke with the NATO head to discuss the options, including the American plan. Now, there is a European plan, and there is what they call the counter plan. What it is? Well, they're holding a meeting to decide what it is, and Zelensky's attended that meeting. The Russians have stated that they have not officially received the peace plan. Now, this is because I think they're waiting for everybody else before they give it to Russia, because they know, right? This is Trump. This is ultimatums, not just to Zelensky, and Russia should know this. That this is a test, like he tested Putin, found out that Putin is lukewarm. Now he's testing Zelensky. If Zelensky accepts the peace plan, Trump will move forward. If he doesn't, Trump will just wait for the end. As I said, for years now, you've got to test both sides. You've got to put them to test. Putin has sort of failed. Zelensky sort of failed. But now that Zelensky's got his second chance, his second wind, he has a chance not just to create peace, but to do what he actually promised to do, but get himself out of the situation he is in, not solely of his own making, although he refuses to get rid of those who, I don't think you could say deliberately put him in a difficult position, but I submit to you that they did. Okay, there's no real proof, but I think Zelensky's aide sold him up the river, used him, knew that the Azov battalion would attack the Russians in Donetsk, and knew the Russians would invade. And the SBU deliberately lied to Zelensky. That's why you get mixed messages in the early days of the war, which was very confusing because the presidential orders were not, were seemingly that Russians weren't going to invade, that this is just the pressure from Putin. And may have been until the Azov battalion attacked. Now, what do we know about the peace plan? Well, Ukraine must slash the size of its army, cede the territory that has been lost. Under the plan, it's detailed. It's to end the conflict. It's not a ceasefire. But that's it. That is it. Okay? They'll try to convince you otherwise that they know all. But yeah, a lot of people instantly call it capitulation. Hey, that's what happens when you lose a war. You haven't won this war. You made it so that Russia hasn't really, so that you haven't lost anything that Russia hasn't already claimed. It's not like they're taking half the country, although they're taking 20% of your economy. You lost that economy before you came to office, Mr. Zelensky, when your predecessors decided to screw over eastern Ukraine. And those predecessors set you up for failure. You can't blame Zelensky for the outcome of this war. He tried his best. He was misled by Europe. They all assumed that, they could carve up Russian tanks like a turkey. Now, despite all the German tanks, it's the 128 M2s and the 30-ish M1s. Not all came from America. There's also those that were sent by Australia and Canada, I think. There's also all the parts that people have sent over the years. The biggest performing tank hasn't been the Ukrainian / Polish T-58 that supposedly destroyed all the T-90s. No. That was actually the modified M2 Bradley with its twin toes and its enhanced gun, which I believe was loaded with AP rounds. Pretty much like a Apache gunship, but less missiles and less helicoptering. They were pretty much ground gunships. High rate of fire, high penetration, armor-piercing rounds. Russia's only got 15 to 20 millimeter armor. Most 35 millimeters have at least 10 millimeters of penetration. So what about the rest? Well, that's where the AP, high velocity, sticks in. See, this is how gunships work. They replace caliber with volume. Now, sure, 1-to-1 Abrams can do a lot of damage, but they're expensive, and they can, and has shown, run out of fuel. The reason why they didn't send more tanks is fuel, right? And weight. 3 of the Abrams were killed because they were detracked and then sank into the mud, because once they stop moving, they sink into the ground. They're too heavy. Which is why the US are redesigning the Abrams. Now, the Ukrainian president is working on a plan and with the European allies, right as we speak. I think I said that before, that his country has to risk losing its dignity and freedom, all with Washington's backing. Yeah. But it mulls the plan, right? This is the thing. Do you swallow your pride, which you have to do, right? Sooner or later. If you're in the losing end of the war, you have to swallow your pride. It's better to end it sooner than later for the preservation of life. That he was appealed to Ukrainians for unity, so he's never betrayed Ukraine. I don't think he's betrayed Ukraine. This is the thing that he may have to put to a vote. And this is where the time is not on his side. But it could work. It could work. But Ukraine doubts Russia's desire. But before you doubt Russia's desire, you have to demonstrate your desire. You have to prove yourself to Trump and the rest of the world that you do want peace, that you're not sacrificing your country just to stay in office. Because so far, that's how you've come across. See, stated intentions don't matter to normal people. It's only the immature, irrational people who go around saying, but you have to take me at my word. It's like, yeah, you're a snake oil salesman. But Russia's had a tough and busy week. 16 more towns are now under Russian control. Battle Group North has taken a town, and several towns fell today. I believe it was 6 that basically, I think the only battle group here that isn't mentioned is Yug. But I think their primary defensive positions, or holding the Ukrainians at various positions. But the casualties are over 1,000 in some areas per day. Okay, in some areas more than others. But yeah, in a week, the battle group center. This is the primary battle group, and I believe Konsk, Tupovsk is battle group center, right? It's the bulk of the Russian army in Ukraine, not the bulk of the Russian army overall. But you can see they have, other than the defensive at Dnipro and parts of the border, the Russians have inflicted a heavy price on Ukraine. And I think for Ukraine to accept that it is a difficult moment, and it's not going to be easy, and it's going to be a tough sell, but those who come out on the side of peace and end this war are going to make rebuilding Ukraine easier. Because you're looking at 10 years just for its major cities, right? That's with the manpower of Europe's unemployed or whatever you want to call it, or contractors. It's like the rebuilding plan, of Europe. They said, oh yes, the Marshall Plan took 10 years. It actually took over 20 years to rebuild. Well, what they don't tell you is, 10 years just to rebuild the major cities. But that was using all the manpower they had available and only focusing on Paris, London, Berlin, and a couple of others. The rest of the countryside took another 10 years to rebuild. And again, my grandfather was too young for the war, but he did in 50. I think it was 58. He was rebuilding in Germany when he died. He had just signed and re-signed. The 10-year plan took longer than 10 years. They were still rebuilding, I think, in the 70s, parts of, but whether or not Zelensky accepts the deal will decide what Russia's response will be, right? And that's what he has to realize. I hope he realizes that, this plan has been presented to him because this is his moment, right? The alternative is that everybody will say he does not want peace. Now, according to media reports, the roadmap features 28 points, including but not limited to the withdrawal from Ukrainian troops from the Russian Donbass that it still controls, downsizing the military, giving up on NATO aspirations, required to make Russia part an official language in exchange. It gets Western security guarantees, and I think it also gets development and rebuilding. I think it also gets... Now, to be clear, these two are the Donbass. It doesn't say about these territories. Now, it doesn't say what Russia has to give up other than a ceasefire. But of course, when America went into Ukraine, went into this plan, they knew that parts of it would be leaked. But so far, they've been able to keep a lid on what has been leaked. by a rogue Ukrainian MP who may have actually, sort of had a wink and a nod to what they could say. Okay, so it's not so much of a leak that it's a controlled leak. But they are going to work calmly and quickly with Washington and Europe. That Putin has dismissed claims that Ukraine is the only shield protecting Europe for Russia. Russia has repeated that they have no plan on attacking the bloc. They've only made steady gains. And Russia has pointed out that Ukraine does have a severe military personnel shortage. Now, in his latest speech, he did say Ukrainians were made of steel, but any metal will break under pressure. Yeah, even the strongest steel, the hardest tanks, the M1 Abrams, they are one of the few tanks where you can still say, yeah, there has not been a one shot, one kill yet on an Abrams, but multiple impacts will crack the tank. The tank can fracture. It just takes multiple impacts near simultaneously, at least, from heavy artillery bombardment to break them. Part of the reasons why I forgot that I still had that open. Part of the reason why they don't make many main battle tanks anymore is they're expensive, and one-on-one, the tanks are going to destroy each other. It's only the last major tank battle in Iraq was actually not Abrams, but a mixture of tanks, and Bradleys came out on top. They decimated, as well as helicopters. Now, again, one of the reasons why we don't see large helicopter fleets is the cost. And air defences, particularly in the West, are catching up. I mean, Russia and Ukraine have destroyed a lot of aircraft between them, but mostly Ukraine has come out worse for wear. Russia quickly learnt not to send its aircraft over Ukraine, and Ukraine, however, took their time before they moved most of their aircraft out of missile range. But French authorities, now it's not clear exactly, was it Macron or implied, but political figures have reached record lows. Questions of how long that his government's going to remain in office. And, he wants to now Macron wants to play the hero on the international stage, but his geopolitics seems to be inconsistent. And he's allowed the country's debt to soar to 115%. The same austerity they imposed on Greece, they won't impose on France. Now, France is destroying itself with public debt on pensions and it's ridiculous. The greed, and they call the French army the Great Mute One because of their long stance of neutrality, has done nothing about the riots in Paris, has done nothing about the collapse of policing in parts of France, with failures after failures. Jails are allegedly full of foreign outlaws who've come to loot France because of the weakness. But the socialists, particularly Hollande and Mitterrand, were critical initially of foreign wars, but now, of course, once upon a time in France, they rebelled against poverty, rebelled against abuse of power, but now they're taking both on the chin and allowing foreigners to rule France. France has fallen. Birth rate fallen. 34% of French babies are foreign. That America lost as well, but the rivalry of the Anglo-Saxons and the Gauls has led them both to be stubborn mules. Right? They hate each other still today. They still want no one European country to dominate Europe, yet clearly, instead of having a friendly rivalry and respect, they've never had respect for their neighbours. They've never had respect for themselves. And as the country is falling apart, authorities seem to be focused on this idea that they're going to send a European army any day now into Ukraine. And every time they bring up how we're going to do it, how we're going to fund it, they get publicly ridiculed. It's not just by Russia's just reporting on this, by the way. They're not the ones doing the ridiculing. Most of the ridiculing has been just echoed by the Russians, who point out how many, that even, it's not just the far left or the far right, that it's former Hollande's ministers, former Mitterrand ministers, even some of Macron's former allies, and of course, Spain, Portugal, etc., all mocking him, saying, "Yeah, you go fight foreign wars. We'll support you in spirit, comrade." This is the ridiculousness of the EU, is they don't have a consistent policy. There is this fake camaraderie. There's this notion, particularly in France, that if they bark an order that you will go to war for us, that the rest of Europe will do so. Now, the last time that worked was Kosovo, and look at the mess they made for themselves. Just to build an airbase in Serbia, basically. Now, criticism of the US plan for Ukraine shows a misunderstanding of the situation on the ground, according to J.D. Vance, who's probably seen the battle reports and seen the images live showing the Russians tearing through in the middle of the night Ukrainian battle lines on the back of motorbikes. These e-scooters barely making a sound, and the Ukrainians having barely enough men to even raise the alarm that the Russians have broken through. And by the time there's some sort of turnout, it's mostly they're fighting the second line, that the first wave is digging in. Now, you can't, if you continue fighting, right, at the current rate, yeah, it may take a long time, but at the current rate, by the end of the year, let's see, 30 days, a town a day, there's another 30 towns. But, by the end of next year, how many dead? 30, 50,000? Maybe Ukraine is right when Zelensky says 34,000. That's how many died in the first 6 months. Maybe that's a figure that he's stuck with and hasn't progressed off that figure in 3 years, which means, in 3 years, who knows how many. But according to some figures, as many as 2 million Ukrainians died, because it's not just those who die in battle, it's those who die of starvation. And the sad fact is, there have been more self-inflicted casualties, particularly amongst civilians, and of course, the thousands who died trying to leave Ukraine illegally and ending up getting shot by Ukrainian border guards. I bet you there's a lot of Americans that go, Yeah, wish we could do that with the illegals. But that's the stupid part of the hypocrisy in the world, right? There's no one standard with liberalism. Everything is shaped by particular circumstances. It's like they can't find or define their own politics. So every criticism Europe comes up with seems to ignore the realities on the ground, that Ukraine is out of money, $400 billion and climbing. Weapons, they are low on ammunition, though they have sufficient weapons, it's ammunitions. But however, sanctions will not stop the war. There are 34 countries, and India, despite its promises, still buys Russian oil. China still buys Russian oil. China is swapping resources. Now, there has been a slowdown, but that's only because China's had some trouble with fuel for it and its train service. We don't know what's happened there. There doesn't seem to be any explanation. But it does appear that China sold off deviated large amounts of its fuel to its navy. But the Taiwan Strait situation never evolved. The war that China was supposed to engage in order to alleviate Russia, promise Russia you can go into Ukraine and 2 years later we'll take the pressure off you in Taiwan, and then Korea will take the pressure off us, and then we'll, our comrades in Venezuela will attack, Colombia or whatever it was meant to be. That big old leak about World War III, which never materialized, right? And right now, Venezuela is shaking its boots. Colombia is quiet as a mouse. Brazil is open for business. It hasn't closed its doors. The US isn't isolated as China expected. And Europe, though fractured, I think if anybody attacked Europe right now, all those rivalries would disappear within minutes or even seconds. It's like attacking a family of morons. The family may hate each other, but they're morons and they'll stick together. But it's fantasy. It's fantasy if you think giving Ukraine more money will fix the problem. You can't buy victory. Smartest people in the world thought in Vietnam they could buy victory, right? Alexander thought he could buy victory. It was short-lived. Like a victory in Germany occurred because those who helped us win the war hated their leadership more than they loved their country. And that's why Democrats so much seethe that they want to undermine the leadership of and make it so that Republicans are reviled for what? Ukraine kills its own people trying to leave Ukraine. Venezuela kills people for trying to leave Venezuela. Go ahead, try and illegally enter Mexico and see where that gets you. No, diplomats have failed in Ukraine, and it's time for people to start living in the real world. Now, apparently this 28 peace point was put together by a number of people, including, right, now it's been expanded a little bit in this article that Ukraine is to recognize Ukrainian Orthodox Church, allowing them to use Russian in Ukraine, and banning foreign long-range weapons on Ukrainian soil. Now, Europe should not need ground-based missiles in. Okay, they're expensive targets. Okay, ground-based missile systems are expensive targets. Strategically, having Ukraine as a buffer zone, NATO had a plan that they would use Ukraine as a long-range buffer zone, and that if Russia tripped the red line, that they would be met with a air combat combined arms, led by air combat platforms that would decimate them with tomahawks and other long-range non-nuclear missiles. And that within 3 days the Russians would be ground to a halt. Now this actually worked, but the problem is that there was no plan in place, Ukraine wanted to go it alone. Europe didn't want to declare war. US already told Russia they weren't going to intervene. I think it was Obama with Crimea. And they considered it a local issue. Because, remember, 70% of those populists were Russians and had declared independence before the Russian invasion. Now, you can talk about Russian interference, but the biggest threat to America right now, Dearborn, the Aslan movement in New Mexico, the California separatist movement, the New York communists, the Black Panthers, the neo-Marxists, and an army of millions of illegals who don't want, and that is a bigger threat. The threat to Ukraine and Russia are not a threat to your sovereignty. Battles between nations should have died out. Now, USA Today. Are you kidding me? I thought I disabled it. Okay. I thought there was going to be something more in this article, but so far it's only, Trump believes that Zelensky has to approve it. Well, no, but yeah. The Crimean Peninsula, it's just confirming. The lines of conflict in Kherson and Zaporozhye, as suspected, will be frozen. It's only the areas they currently control, except for Donetsk. Lugansk and Donetsk, 100% in eastern Ukraine. This is a recognition of the fact that these two declared their independence and then joined Russia. Which may sound familiar. Remember when Saskatchewan and Alberta said that they are going to declare their independence and then join the United States? It'd be hypocritical to turn around and say that's just Russian interference. Mark Carney tried that card. No. You can't just bark Russian interference, okay? You actually have to prove it. Your emotions, your paranoia, your gut feelings are not valid, okay? So many people out there are arguing like children, when the reality is Ukraine is holding talks to accept the peace plan. But they're also holding talks what happens if Russia doesn't accept the peace plan. No doubt they want to know that. But of course, Britain, we're too reliant on Trump's America. Oh, really? You can't defend against them. You can't defend who's defended Britain the most? Storms. In the last 10 years, British storms have done more to protect Britain and keep out foreign incursion. Britain's in a world of hurt, and all they can care about is, let's defend Ukraine's borders. Now, Keir Starmer, of course, wants to stand with his dear comrade Zelensky, but I don't think those two like each other. Okay? I think Zelensky, Scheinbaum, and Starmer, if they were in a room together, it'd be I think Macron and it's very hard to tell, but I think Macron doesn't like, he's turned his back on Zelensky more than once. I think Germans may actually sort of, patronizingly look down, but I don't think anybody likes Zelensky. I think he doesn't understand why. And it's when you look at the people he surrounds himself with and then refuses to take the most basic advice is, let's get rid of the people who keep stealing But his excuse is he can't find better. This is the problem with Ukraine. If you can't find better, well, you don't belong in the EU until you can fix your problems. Now, I think I think there's a compromise in there, which is why EU is talking now with Zelensky, and that is intelligence sharing, Ukrainian labor, all that stuff, grain deals, all sorts of stuff. I think Europe realizes that they need them. Okay, they need this war over. They can't keep borrowing billions, and they can't steal Russia's assets without collapsing their own economy. It's because they can steal them, they have to sell them to somebody. That just means selling them to China, which is the whole point. This is what happened with Ubisoft in a roundabout way. When Ubisoft, right, wanted to fight off a takeover bid by another company, or actually an alleged takeover bid. Apparently in the French law, if you reach a certain percentage of ownership, you have to declare pretty much a hostile takeover or reduce your shareholdings to just below the threshold. Now, to fight off a alleged takeover, they went to Tencent to buy up the rest of the shares that were trading on the market. The problem is Tencent gave them conditions. All those DEI conditions that were set by France and Quebec and the Ontario Teachers Fund, they tore Ubisoft a new asshole. They turned a thriving Assassin's Creed franchise. Now, initially, they got Valhalla, 20 million sales, but then it dropped off 16, 8, 4. It dropped off, and they just kept doubling down on dumb. Now, I know a lot of people do like longer games, but the vast majority do not. They like repeatable play games. This is what they don't understand. People will play a 10-hour game for 100 hours, but they won't play a 100-hour game 10 times. You know what I mean? They'll play a game with branching options multiple times. But if a game has one option, they play it once. They may play it again with DLC, or they may take something like Skyrim and play it over and over again because it's got mods. I honestly think that had they made a lot of the side content optional, Ubisoft could have saved itself by listening, right? Cut the playtime. Take out half the antagonists. Reduce the grind, right? Reduce the overdamage of high-level players, okay, against you, right? And which will enable you to escape instead of having to restart the level. If you basically, biggest part was cut the playtime, right, and make the main storyline slim. Play through. It doesn't matter if it's for 20 levels, 50 levels, or 100 levels. Just 15 hours, and then the rest optional, so you can play the main storyline, right? Make it level 20. Play the main storyline. But if you want to grind higher and longer, there's different optional groups out there. And also should have made a branching storyline that gave it that there's a clear story ending, and then there's the optional endings. Unfortunately, and this happens in real life all the time, people get stubborn, whether they're in Microsoft or Ubisoft and it's no different with a CEO of what was the other? What's another industry in danger right now? Electric vehicles, believe it or not, are in danger. Okay, Elon has stated that the sales are plateauing. They'll continue to increase, but very slowly. Prices are going to come down because, high competition from China, but there's an oversupply. Okay, there's more electric cars than there are buyers. So it's going to dramatically affect the market. Now, Elon's coming out with a new battery, apparently. I don't know if this is true, but he's also coming out with any day now, apparently, with robots, and he's got other projects. But, of course, most of his money now appears to be Starlink. But electric cars. If Ukraine hadn't gone to war, the electric cars would have been made in for Europe would have been made in Ukraine. Ukraine has missed out on so much. And again, like Ubisoft, right? If it wasn't for the Ukraine crisis, Ubisoft would have relocated, right, to Eastern Europe. Now, of course, some of the Eastern European software companies are in danger as well of collapsing. Not just because of the war and the shortage of skilled employees, because they can't get people to come to Poland, even though they don't have to learn Polish or anything, or go through any extraordinary visa programs, and a lot of them can work from home. It's the culture, okay, the adversarial culture of Ukraine, the pride of Eastern Europe, and the lack of desire to innovate. Now, of course, Romania has its issues as well. Hungary seems to be the only one who wants to work on these issues, and has been the only consistent voice of peace. And yeah, if Eastern Europe got together as a bloc and policed itself, I think they would clean up better than relying on EU and its outdated, what would you call it, bureaucracy. That it's a bloated bureaucracy. Now, it's not that Hungary doesn't believe that you should get all the evidence. It's just the way they go about, they announce investigations. That basically gives Ukraine a heads up, and they're never going to get to the bottom of the corruption. And to say that there's corruption in Poland, corruption everywhere, and it seems to be they want to focus on Ukraine right now, and it feels to me like this is Macron's desperate plea to get him over the line, to get him to the end of his current presidency so he can retire. But I think, France where France got in the problem and Ukraine was loaning money. And now they've got so many bad debts. I think they're realizing that they've got to realize that Ukraine, it might not be a matter of Ukraine won't pay. Ukraine can't pay. And taking Russia's assets, it's just going to hurt you more, because all those factories in Russia, the Volkswagen and all those plants, they're gone. Okay, you're just, and then how are you going to get foreign investment from other countries? Oh, and then I'll say, but Russia, and then you're going to turn on China. China's got bigger investments than Russia. And the whole thing is you lured Russia in saying, well, yes, you invest in us, you won't go to war because it'll destroy your own investments. And this is the thing. They've got to realize that they've got to stick to their own principles. They won't declare war on Russia, because if they do, it'll destroy Eastern Europe. And they've already invested over $1 trillion into Eastern Europe, and they're nowhere near finished investing, and their investments aren't paying off. They don't know what to do. And that's because war isn't profitable, okay? Because the only reason why World War II was profitable was because they were able to help themselves to all that gold, and basically all agree that that gold just disappeared at the bottom of the ocean, They can't do it this time because most of Ukraine's sources most of the Ukraine mines were either expended, except for a couple of coal mines, and the rest undeveloped. So it's like America said, it's going to take 10 years to develop the first Ukrainian mine. It'll be well past his presidency before you'll see a return on Ukraine. And then it'll take, and nobody, the quiet part that they won't say, I think it's Keynesian Institute, it's going to take 125 years for Ukraine to get out of the hole they're in. Although it took England 112 years to get out of their hole, sort of. Don't forget, their hole started back in the Napoleonic Wars. But every time they kept getting close to getting out of it, then came the Boer War, then came the World War One, then World War Two. So, yeah. Finally, when UK is out of war debt, let's go into Serbia. And then let's go into Ukraine. It's like, damn it. And again, another reason why they're not profiting off the war is because Ukraine isn't a rich country with lots of money to buy weapons. France and England, when they went to war, they had a lot of gold reserves, which are now American gold reserves. Although those were sort of sold off. We don't know exactly how much. Nobody wants to say. So to save Ukraine, it comes down to Mr. Zelensky. And I think this is one of these golden opportunities that he has where he can come out a genuine hero. And genuinely, particularly if he's genuine, but genuinely save Ukraine and at least be able to walk away with his head held high and probably actually say he could do his best, even though there's times that he didn't. But it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, he gets to walk away and pretty much nobody will argue that he did his, but if he prolongs this war, he risks being a casualty, not of Russia, but of his own people. He risks losing Kharkiv because the Russians have broken lines, but they haven't gone far. He risks losing a third of Zaporozhye. They probably won't take Kherson. We don't know where Russia will stop, but it will probably be a third of Ukraine before they stop, because they'll go, yeah, Europe might declare war on us and it's too catastrophic. It's like everybody wants to go to knife's edge, for the thrill. And I think Zelensky could pull the rug, not just on Putin, because if Zelensky declares peace, he comes out really smelling good, and it makes Putin, and it really, he gets to watch Putin squirm and face the reality that Russia will now faces, 500% sanctions and massive influx into of long-range missiles. So all he has to do is want peace, and Putin has to blink, and it's all over for Putin. It's really knife-edge stuff now. Whoops. I did actually restart this video a couple of times. I forgot to reset. Thank you all for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. Please support the channel. You support the channel in a multitude of ways. One way is, of course, Ko-Fi. Make a generous donation of Ko-Fi today. Of course, there's Patreon. And my favourite, of course, buy my books, buy my merch. All my links are in the link tree description below, in my profile, or scan the QR code on the screen. I really appreciate each and every one of you. Could just take a moment to like, share, or subscribe. Really helps out the channel. And, of course, thank you to all those who've commented. I do know that the New World Order is ultimately the ones pulling the strings. But there is no law yet that we can enact, other than maybe RICO, George Soros and his son, for foreign money laundering. But that's yet remains to be seen. But still, it's better we get this war over with than let it prolong. Thank you for listening. I'll see you all in the next video, and bye for now.